Today we're sewing up an easy knit dress. This is the column dress by the Pattern Pages. This pattern makes a great comfortable everyday piece, and the midi length and the long sleeves also make it a great piece for cooler weather. This dress pattern is available as a PDF download at the Pattern Pages website. I got the copy shop version for free this month with my subscription to the Pattern Pages magazine. I've left a link to the pattern and to the magazine below so you can check out all the details. The fabric that I'm using in this video today is a blue and white jersey from Rex Fabrics. I'm sewing this dress today entirely using my regular sewing machine. For the main seams, I'm using a zigzag stitch with a width of 0.5 millimeters and a length of 2.5 millimeters. And for applying my neckband, I'm using a lightning bolt stitch, just using the default machine settings. And finally, for my hems, I've chosen a wider zigzag stitch with a width of 2.5 and a length of 2.5. One thing I want to let you know before we get started is that for this sleeve, there were no notches for front, back, and the top of the sleeve cap. So what I did was I took a sleeve pattern piece from another pattern just to verify the front and the back and to gauge where I should place the top of the sleeve at my shoulder seam. I hope you join me today in sewing this dress. Let's get started. Place your front and back pieces right sides together and pin your shoulder seams. And then sew your shoulder seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Additionally, to reinforce these shoulder seams so they don't overstretch over time, I'm going to cut pieces of 1/4 inch wide clear elastic to fit each shoulder. Then I'll take it to the sewing machine, and with that clear elastic, laying on top of the stitching line that we just created, I'm going to sew that elastic in place from one side to the other, right on top of the original stitching line. And I'm sewing those elastic pieces to the shoulder seams of the back bodice piece. Now with the front and back pieces still right sides together, we're going to pin the side seams, starting at the underarm and going all the way to the bottom of the dress. Doing this on both sides of the dress. Then we're going to sew both of our side seams from the underarm to the bottom of the dress with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Fold your sleeves in half right sides together and pin the underarms. And do this for both sleeves. And then sew your underarm seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Since the distance around the top of the sleeve is greater than the armhole of the bodice, I'm going to sew basting stitches around the sleeve cap, starting a couple inches away from the underarm seam, all the way around to a couple inches away from the underarm seam on the other side. I'm going to use the longest stitch on my machine and go all the way around with about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now with my dress inside out and my sleeve right side out, I'm going to place the sleeve inside the dress, taking a moment to make sure that you're inserting the correct sleeve to the correct side of the dress, and pin in place starting at your underarm seam. Then I'll pin the top of my sleeve to the shoulder seam. Then I'll start pulling the basting stitches that I sewed into the sleeve so I can fit the sleeve into the armhole from one side of the underarm to the shoulder seam. And once it fits, pin in place. Do the same to fit the rest of your sleeve on the other side. Now with my sleeve pinned in place, I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew all the way around with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to sew slowly and carefully so that I don't catch any puckers around that armhole as I sew. For the bottom hem of the dress, I've taken it to my ironing board, and I folded up the raw edge to the wrong side by 1 inch. Now I'm going to pin all the way around. Now that that's pinned, I'm going to do the same thing for the bottoms of my sleeves, folding and pressing those raw edges to the wrong side by 1 inch and pinning in place. Now I'm going to take the dress to the sewing machine and sew my hems in place for the sleeves and for the bottom of the dress. Fold your neckband in half, matching the short edges, and pin in place. And then sew the 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then you can fold your neckband in half once again, this time wrong sides together, and give those top folded edges a good press. Now I'm going to find the quarter points of the neckband and place pins at those markings. And I'll use pins to mark the quarter points on my neckline as well. Now I'll place the seam of my neckband right sides together with the back neckline, matching those center back pins and pin in place. And then continue matching the neckband and neckline together and pin in place at the quarter points. Now I'll take this to the sewing machine and sew my neckband in place with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, slightly pulling that neckband to fit the neckline from pin to pin as you go. Then press your seam allowances away from the neckline and toward the inside of the dress. Then additionally, you could choose to do an extra row of top stitching right below the original stitching line, tacking down that seam allowance on the inside as you go. I've used a narrow zigzag stitch to top stitch that seam allowance on the inside all the way around. If you're choosing to also create the belt, place both of the belt pieces right sides together, matching one short edge and pin in place. And then sew this one short edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once that's sewn, open out the two pieces and press your seam open, and then fold your belt piece in half the long way, right sides together. And pin the raw edges together all the way around. Now I'm going to start sewing at one short edge with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sewing that end closed and then pivoting along the long edge, sewing all the way across and sewing the opposite short edge as well. Somewhere along the long edge, you're going to want to leave an opening of about 2 inches so that we can turn this belt right side out. Now turn the belt right side out through the gap that you left in your stitching. Then give your belt a good press. To finish the belt, I'm going to pin close the gap in my stitching, and then I'm just going to edge stitch it in place from one side of the opening to the other, just using a regular straight stitch. And now your dress is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out the rest of my video library for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.